Now, there seemed to be a sense of disheartenment this past Freedom Day that the country had not fulfilled its promise. One of those who has confidently pigeonholed South Africa as a so-called failed state is Hlulani Mabasa. He's the president of the Black Consciousness Movement United. He joins us now. Hlulani, welcome to Newsfeed PM.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
Now, Hlulani, you have penned South Africa, or rather pigeonholed South Africa as a failed state. How do you define a failed state?
Well, I think one thing which is very important when we think about South Africa is that the things that are happening now are not a coincidence or a mistake. When the ruling party assumed power, it assumed it based on a logic that rests on pudding. In other words, they wanted to control a country which they don't actually control themselves, in the sense that the question of land has not been brought back. The question of control of the means of production has not been resolved. And now you have a situation where practically everything is falling apart, be it health, be it the education system. We just saw recently with the floods and everything. So we are dealing with a state that is incapable of governing. And I believe that it has been incapable from its inception to govern this country in the first place. So all those things are actually markers of how this country has fallen backwards as opposed to going forward. Now, the masses themselves are beginning to see that this country does not represent them. I want to tell just a brief story. When the poet Sonia Sanchez made a remark and said, well, one day she had attended a rally where Malcolm X was speaking. After the rally, she then stood up trying to go to Malcolm and talk to him. Of course, the bodyguards blocked her and said, no, you can't do that. And Malcolm said, well, let her come through. She then said, Malcolm, I liked some of the things that you said, but there are certain things that I did not like. And Malcolm looked at her with a smile and said, sister, one day you will, one day you will. And I think the Azanian people have had their Sonia Sanchez moment, where they begin to see that those who are in power are not the right people in the first place to be ruling this country. So those are all markers, as I said, that this is a failed state. It cannot go any further. In fact, we shouldn't expect even the ANC to self-correct, because for the longest time, the biggest mistake people have made is that we wait on the sidelines hoping that the ANC will do better. And it will not do better, because it's not resting on firm foundation in the first place.
And speaking about standing on the sidelines, Hlulani, we must be also fair that a state is made up of a number of factors. It's government, it's private sector, and most important, it's the citizens of that state. Where do we put active citizenry when it comes to a state such as South Africa? Should people really be taught to just stand on the sidelines and wait for that savior? Or are we enforcing a culture amongst people to say to them, you need to stand up, you need to direct the leaders that you have put in power as to what you'd want from your state?
Well, remember, initially when the ANC came into power, it came with the premise of saying, we will do this. Vote for us, we'll give you houses. Now, for us in the Black Consciousness Movement United, and generally in the philosophy of the Black Consciousness, we've never believed in such. We've always believed in self-determination. Now, in that sense, if the people are made to understand that they are part and parcel of what goes on in the country, as opposed to leaving all the power to these self-styled messianic figures, the people then are able then to engage and to do certain things. Even now, when the masses try to stand up and to make certain demands, they find themselves fighting against a government that is not willing to listen to them. So I don't think that the fault rests primarily on the people. If you remember quite well, last year when the so-called July events happened, everybody was very quick to talk about the masses being the ones that are looting, damaging property and so forth. But interestingly, the discourse has changed now. They always say, well, we have to check unless July happens again, because people are not served, people are not being serviced and so forth. So it's very interesting that now suddenly they sort of understand that the events as they happened initially in the first place was because of them. So you're dealing with a situation where almost all the aspects of the South African democracy, it promotes participation in terms of the democratic process. But where do you participate when there aren't those spaces to participate? Now, of course, we in the Black Consciousness Movement are a movement that is for the people. We work with the people, among the people. So for that reason, we would want to say the masses themselves must not give up because they've seen the ANC having done what it has done. They must look for alternatives, and we must not anticipate that that alternative will come to anybody else, will come from anybody else who is in the context of the parliament and the electoral system. They will not do so, because unfortunately big business and those who are in power will not allow that to happen in the first place.
So Hlulani, are you then saying that the participation of the people is there, but there's just a blockage somewhere in the system for people not to participate? And if so, what's this blockage and what's causing it?
Well, I think the people do participate. However, one thing which we have to center around is that people need to participate not only within the spaces of NGO and so forth. They must be looking for revolutionary change, meaning that they must be doing certain things to make sure that they reach that logical goal that they want. And in them participating in that particular way, they need to sort of move away from those who hope that the system will reform and look for people who are looking for things to happen in the first place. So I think part of the failure is that we find a situation where we march, we picket, we do all these things, but the reality of the matter, that will not change things. So we're saying that people must fashion themselves in understanding that there's a need now to look at the politics of revolution. Not the politics of bread, but the politics of revolution, and make sure that we do not wait for a 5-year period for a certain government to be in power. But actually, at some point, we should be able to say, because democracy allows us to engage, to remove them even immediately when we see that there's something wrong. So I'm saying that the masses have to get into the attitude of fashioning themselves around the politics of revolution, controlling their communities and being able to build self-reliance structures within that community so that the power begins on the ground to go up, not what has been happening down, because the logic of trickle-down logic will not actually work in the first place, because it is always the few who will benefit from this particular system. And we should not expect that they are actually going to help us and tell us that these things will improve, these things will change. They will not do so. We will have to force that upon them in the first place in order for us to achieve the things that we want to achieve.
But surely, Hlulani, the ruling party or the government that's currently in place has learned from some of their mistakes. I mean, we are seeing now with the KZN floods that the AG has come in and said that they won't conduct an audit at the end of the process, but a day-to-day ongoing process audit will take place in ensuring that the relief funds that are allocated to KZN victims are not wasted. I mean, we do know that corruption is a huge problem within this country, and surely they are then taking the stand and showing that they accept, they see what has been happening in the country, and they're taking a stand against it.
Well, have they really learned their mistake? I think the question which we have to address ourselves to is the fact that now they have to do so because they're beginning to see that they will lose power. They're not doing it because they are thinking of the people per se. They're doing this because they have to save face. You know, and initially when the whole issue was raised and they were like, okay, money is going to be allocated, it was within the ANC itself that people began to say, will the money reach the people? Even the people themselves. So somehow we have to really be honest with ourselves as to whether they've learned the lessons or they have not learned the lessons. And my contention is that they've not learned the lessons. They just have to save face. But it is then the role of the Vanguard group to sharpen the contradiction in order for us to make sure that we remove them from power. Because such things should not even happen in the first place, you know. So they shouldn't happen if we have a proper sovereign government that is in control of this country. The quality of education in our country has always been in question. But what I want to know from you is what contributions would you think would be needed to be done within our education system in also just not educating young people, but educating them to a point where one day when they are leaders of a country like South Africa, it doesn't turn into a failed state? Well, the Black Consciousness Movement at the time as SASO defined education in a very interesting way. They said education is the accumulation of knowledge that can be used. You know, so you have a situation where people are being given education, but it's not an education that they really can use. It's more of trying to get some monetary value and get into the workspace. Now, a very interesting thing is happening across literally all the universities. There's this whole thing of Africanization. But what does it mean? Does it mean introducing more black voices or so forth, or tailor-making the kind of educational system that will deal with the problems of Africa and the educations of black people? Now, my contention, again, is that that is not what is being done. You know, Tiro, just in February, we're commemorating him. He said, unless your education is linked to the plight of Africa, it is meaningless and useless. And unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. We've got a large number of graduates who are sitting at home, not working, because somewhere, somehow, the reality of what they have studied does not tally with the reality where they live. You speak of Africanism, and I just want to ask you this in terms of conflicts and contradictions in our culture, in our religions. Do you believe that those have any impact on what we become as a state? Because, as I mentioned earlier, it isn't only reliant on just the government that's leading you, but it's also the culture and the people that live and operate within that state. Do you think that the lack of Africanism amongst Africans contributes to this phenomena? Well, I wouldn't really say the lack of Africanism per se. I would say unfortunately for black people and oppressed people all over the world, the reality of oppression, 400 years of oppression, has left us in a very messed up state, psychologically and otherwise. Now, there is a need for us to reevaluate certain values about ourselves. At the current moment, we're facing a situation with Operation Tutula, whereas we understand that if this was a sovereign country, we would not even have that because the government will know who comes and who doesn't come in. But now you see the attack being imposed on other African people or black people, but those who control the means of production and land are not being attacked. So I'm saying the common experience, the black experience that we have experienced as a people should be the first place where we rally around to solve African problems or to solve the problems that affect the third world and the black world in general.
So, Hlulani, are we saying that it's all doom and gloom? Is all lost in South Africa? Have we thrown in the towel? And if so, how do we regain South Africa back?
Well, the Revolutionary Organization has not thrown in the towel. But I will say that, yes, it is doom and gloom. But what has to happen is that a new paradigm has to be created. And that paradigm has to be created through proper political education to understand what is it that we want initially as the people and how we hope to achieve those things. Now, in the current context, most political organizations that you find are usually trapped around the issue of those who fund them. You don't have a sense where there's a proper politicization that happens in that particular organization. So I'm saying somewhere, somehow, the issue of proper politicalization and also understanding the history of black people is absolutely important. And once we accept that, because now the problem that we have is that those who are in power are a buffer between us and power. They're not the power. They're the managing elites. They are those who are the elites who control the means of production. But the people have to be taught and understand how to make the distinction. What you call him, the Jamaican poet, Bob Marley, in that song, Burning and Looting, has a very interesting line where he says, how many rivers do we have to cross to talk to the boss? And I think we have to hearken to that call that how many rivers do we really have to cross to talk to the boss and actually remove the buffer that stands between us and power. And we know that power is white and power is capitalistic in form.
Sure. Hlulani Mabasa, let's hold it there. Thank you so much for joining us and your inputs on South Africa as we have celebrated Freedom Day this week. But it does seem that for many South Africans, the freedom that was so hard fought for is not exactly what we thought it would be. That is Mr. Hlulani Mabasa, who's the president of the Black Consciousness Movement United, giving us his account of what and why he thinks that South Africa is a failed state. Thank you so much for joining us.